Simon, this feeds into, and I think this is a very dangerous point, and this is very dangerous feedback for the government going into an election year. Am I right in saying, and I'm asking for your analysis here, that it feeds into this almost bedded down view of the Albanese government of them being unable to prosecute, two things at the same time? I'm thinking about being distracted by the voice, for example. Is this another smaller example of that in a cost of living crisis? And voters going into the next election going to be asking, well, what is the point of this government?
I think that's exactly it's this idea. It certainly hasn't done anything to convince voters that this is a government that gets the point, that gets the real, what are the really things animating people right now. And as I say, social media does worry parents. It is on parents' mind. So that there is a sense that they are speaking to an issue that matters to people, but they're not doing it in a way that convinces people that they've got their sort of finger on the pulse of how kids work, how technology works. So it's just another sort of proof point for people that this government kind of doesn't get it.
So going into the next election though, Simon, what are you starting to get in feedback in the groups? Is it still, we hate all politicians, they're all as bad as each other, or are you getting more subtle feedback that says, actually, we might want to give Peter Dutton a go? Is that changing at all, or you still think most likely a minority Labor?
It depends where you go. Mm-hmm. So particularly in those outer suburban contests, let's focus there, because that's where the battle is going to be won and lost. We know the Libs have pivoted to the outer suburbs, so let's focus there. And what we're seeing there is amongst Labor constituencies, historical Labor constituencies in those areas, is absolutely an openness to that. Mm-hmm. Now, this should mark a concern. So they're not necessarily, if you were to poll them today, they'd probably still say that they're voting Labor, but extremely soft. So we know every time we ask people about the strength of their vote, that a majority of Labor voters in these areas describe their vote as soft. Mm. They're shopping around. They just haven't made their mind up yet exactly where that's going to land. But when we talk to them in the groups, 5 years ago, we would have asked them, would you vote Liberal? And they would have, got the pitchforks out and come after us. We ask them now, would you consider vote Liberal? And yeah, we'll have a think about it.
Wow.
He's got some big ideas, nuclear. We're not sure about that, but, at least he's got an idea.
Yeah.
And we contrast that with a government that has kind of ignored us through these multiple crises.
So they feel ignored by Labor. I mean, this should be bread and butter politics for Labor, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just the Albanese government. It is a decades-long kind of neglect that they talk about. They're mm-hmm. very much aware that their communities have been ignored by successive Labor governments and Liberal governments, but Labor should have been on their side. That's the point of difference at state and federal level.
Yeah.
And the Albanese government has done nothing during its term to convince them otherwise, that this long-term trend is not going to continue into the future, and that's what's driving that volatility.
Simon, as I sit here, I think about the parallels between us and the US, given the result we've just seen in the United States election. And look, they're not direct lines. The parallels aren't all there. But what I found in particular with people in the swing states that would traditionally vote Democrat, they would say to me that, yes, they didn't like Donald Trump. They hated him, in fact, but they were still considering voting for him because they felt like they were going backwards. And the best line I actually heard from one of these voters was, well, we can't afford to be offended by him. Is there some of that same sentiment here?
There's the same sentiment in the sense that folk are looking for disruption. Absolutely. Yeah. The current situation can't continue because, we've seen over the past 20 years what's going to happen to us. We know what the trend is. Mm. The difference here is that, particularly in the major parties, is that neither of them are really seen as the disruptors, particularly in these outer suburban communities. Labor is just kind of shown them again over these past few years that it's going to be kind of incremental, do a little bit here and there, but it's not doing anything transformative to affect their lives. And the Liberals are still the party of the economy, big business and those sorts of things. As I say, they're considering holding their nose and voting for that just because they've lost confidence in Labor. but it doesn't necessarily mean that Liberal is kind of seen as this in itself kind of attractive, disruptive force. There is different similar kind of symptoms, but it's playing out in different dynamics here.
Yeah, I mean, governments get voted out, not in, do they? So that's going to be particularly true of this election.
Yeah, I think so, Laura. I think it's very much about Labor now. You know, the time they've got left, they absolutely have to prosecute the case that they are, 110% focused on the issues that matter. That they don't really have achievements to run on. I mean, they will try and get the housing thing over the line, but that's been a long time coming. And as you and I have spoken about before, people get to this point of the cycle where you start to deliver things now, and the question becomes, well, why didn't you do that 2 years ago? Like, there's this filter of sinners. It's very, very tricky territory. But their only way forward through it is strong, progressive economic policy, and prosecuting the case that, we've kind of got things stabilised. We had to stabilise things. We apologise for that in a sense, but now we're building something better for the future, because that building something better for the future is the bit that's really missing.
Yeah. Always a fascinating chat, Simon. Thanks so much. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Laura.